It's my privilege to introduce our guest today, Jennifer Vries of BlueStreak Learning. I've known Jennifer ever since she produced a webinar that Don Stepich and I hosted for the eLearning Guild, and I met her in person at an ISPI Bagel Barrel after that. As specialist in e-learning, BlueStreak uses prototyping to improve quality and shrink schedule. During her time with us, Jennifer will describe how she got into the performance improvement business, share how BlueStreak Learning makes decisions about when and what to prototype. She'll share examples of her work and she'll answer our questions. Jennifer, we're delighted to have you with us today.
Thanks, Steve. Great to be here. Thanks, everybody, for coming. I am going to bring up, there we go, my slides. Thank you, if that was you, Steve. Appreciate it. So as we discussed, we're going to talk about how I got into the performance improvement business. And we've already talked about these things, so I'm just going to move on. I've been in the performance improvement business for 28 years this month. So since 1987. And I got started, how did I get into it was the question. I got into it, I was working at a company which is now Skillsoft, but back then it was, at first it was ASI, and then it merged with a company called Deltac, and it became Applied Learning. But during that time, I worked with some of the, I think, the best minds in the business at the time. People like Ken Silber were there, if anybody knows that name. Rob Fauché. I basically got into this because I had people all around me who were part of what was called NSPI then, which was National, or was it NSPI, National Society for Performance Improvement, or was something else. Actually, it was Performance and Instruction back then. And but they were all very performance oriented. I mean, people like Judy Hale were there as well, and around with us. And I was very much a part of that chapter in Chicago. And I learned from the beginning that training really doesn't mean much unless you're really showing that you're improving performance. So I started in this industry. I went through this 5-week training program with some of these amazing people as my instructors. And then from there, the company that I was working at had a master's degree in instructional technology at night in a conference room at our work. So at like, I'd finish my work up at like 5 or 6, and then I'd go straight into a conference room, and they handed me my textbook, and they handed me a form to fill out, and they paid my tuition up front. So all I had to do was show up. I could use my work projects as some of my projects for my classes. So I mean, it was kind of totally win-win. I really, I couldn't lose with that. I ended up getting half my master's degree in instructional technology with that program, and then I had to go down to Governor State University to finish the rest of it. Going back a little bit, before I started at Applied Learning, I was a technical writer. I was writing computer manuals for McDonald's, and just basically how to do it. So I'd always kind of been involved in the writing part of this. I started after I was a technical writer. I actually was a course author, which, if you're familiar with that term, it's the people who program the courses. So it's kind of funny because when I interviewed for this job, I went out to this company and they showed me, now this is 1987, they showed me these incredible interactive video courses, which, by the way, I joke, it's back. Interactive video is now back. But in 1987, they showed me, it was Laserdisc, 12-inch Laserdisc with touchscreens. And they showed me these courses and they said, hey, you could write these. And I was a technical writer at the time, so I thought, well, that'd be really cool. Wow, this is so much more exciting than these print things that I'm writing for these computer manuals. So I went and I took the job. Well, anyway, they lied to me. The course author was not the person who was writing the courses. The course author was the person who was programming the courses. But I needed the money and I needed the job. And actually, that organization really gave me a leg up in the industry. So I ended up learning how to program the courses, and then applied for a promotion where I learned how to develop the courses, and where I got into the instructional design program at that company. So questions about my background or how I got into this? I will look to your group chat. I'll tell you a little bit about afterwards. I worked for about half a dozen other companies, including IBM and Motorola, the Joint Commission, I worked anyway. I worked in the travel industry, and then eventually started BlueStreak Learning, which it was about 10 years ago when we went full time with the business. And I don't see any chat about my background, so I'm just going to move on. We're going to get into prototyping. So this on the screen here is the definition of the word prototype. And this is out of merriam-webster.com. It's Webster's dictionary. But what is a prototype? So a prototype is an original or first model of something that you use to develop other forms or copied over and over again. So when we're talking about prototyping, we're usually developing something that we can use as a model. It's part of modeling, and then basically once we refine the model, then we can do it over and over again, which helps us streamline our process. Usually it should have the typical qualities of what the ultimate goal or what the ultimate course is going to be, and it's a first or an early example. Like I said, it's a model. You're developing something that you're going to refine, and then you're going to duplicate over and over and over again. So, oh, good question. Okay, so I see. To what extent is your background similar to other people who work in e-learning? I think I'm unique. Most people who come in to e-learning, well, some people come in through the instructional design area, and some people come in through media. So I'm very, very involved with the eLearning Guild, and I find that there are generally two tracks where people get into e-learning. One is through media, and the other one's through instruction. My background is kind of similar to the people in instruction who came out of instructional design. However, the one thing that I think is really different about my background is that I've never done classroom training. I went straight from technical writing into e-learning, and I did a few classroom projects, and I hated every minute of it, and so it wasn't my thing. Most people who come out of instructional design have done classroom training, and I really haven't done very much of it. I went straight into e-learning and stuck there, and I think that's one of the ways that my background is different. Hope that answers your question. If you have more, go ahead and type them in the chat. Now, I have a question for you about first of all, I guess it's kind of a why are you here? Why do you think prototyping might be valuable? Let me know your thoughts on that. And it's a lot more fun when we get some participation going. So, oh, there we go. Okay, cool. Thank you, guys. Now it's flying. I got a whole bunch of answers all at once. So one of the reasons is to improve quality while decreasing overall budget and schedule associated with rework. Absolutely. Because if you can get it right in your prototype, then if you duplicate it over and over again, you've not made the same mistakes over and over again. So Bethany, you're a one-woman department and new to the field. I need to learn how to make the most of my time. Okay. Yeah, and the prototyping can do that, because if you can get a client, or you can get the person who wants the training to give you some immediate feedback, it can really help refine your ideas. Sometimes people don't know what they're asking for when they say they want e-learning. Well, there's so many different types and styles of e-learning that we don't know what they mean by that. So, and then my organization is IG on reuse. Oh, big. I think it's missing the B. Big on reuse. So absolutely. So yeah, if you can build something and then reuse it, you're going to be able to build the next piece much faster. So absolutely. So here's some of my reasons about prototyping. Why prototype? I think one of the things that I found, it's more of an intangible benefit, but it really does help because it involves the client and team in the creative process. So when you're prototyping, you're asking for a lot of input, and you're involving the client. Do you want it this way? Do you want it that way? Do you like this color or that color, or these styles of menus or that style of menus? Often what we'll do is we might actually build two or three different versions and ask them which they like. Do you like the buttons on this version or on that version? Do you like the text on this version or that version? Do you like the photographic style on this version, or do you like these icons over here? So And it really involves them in making some decisions up front. And by doing that, you're increasing their satisfaction. I do have some clients, though, who are like, oh, would you just stop? I hired you to do it. I don't want to be sitting here making all of these decisions. So hopefully they're happy in the end. but, uh, but most of the time, involving them up front and making some of these decisions, they understand why they're doing it and they like that. It is a form of formative evaluation. A lot of times when you talk about formative evaluation in your instructional design classes, what you're talking about is typically where you're running a beta test of a course. It came out of that instructor-led training orientation where you run the whole course, and then you do a beta test, and then you revise the course. Well, in this case, you don't develop the whole course. You develop a piece of the course or pieces of the course and then do formative evaluation. But it can help form the ideas. It also clarifies a lot of the misunderstandings and ambiguity, like when people say that they want e-learning and there's so many different options and choices. It can clarify a lot of those things. Reduce rework later in the project. I think you've kind of mentioned that you're big on reuse. Well, it also reduces rework, because if you take something and you duplicate it 12 times and you have the same error in all 12 of them, there's a lot more work to fix that than there is if you just fix it in the prototype and then duplicate it 12 times after that. One of the other reasons is addressing technical challenges. We've had some projects where we've been asked to use new or different tool sets, or deliver, for example, on different platforms, and it's something that's new, and prototyping allows us to be able to address some of the challenges with using a new technology or a new piece of software. And it can also help us firm up our time and cost estimates because a lot of times when they're asking us for an estimate, they don't really know what they want, and we have to do our best. But once we have a prototype, we know what it is we're going to be developing. So any questions or comments on those? Where did I learn about prototyping? It's not something you often see in ID courses. It's where did I learn about it? And it's funny because when I learned how to design e-learning back in the 80s, it was all based upon that original thought, like classroom training, where you would run the whole class and then you do your formative evaluation. But I think where it really came out of was when I was a producer for World Book Encyclopedia, and I was working with people who were more out of a multimedia background, and those people who were from the multimedia background, they were much bigger on prototyping than the people who, we didn't really learn about it in instructional design. But the people from multimedia would be like, well, let's just mock something up and see if we can get some reaction. And it's a great idea. It works very well. I mean, in e-learning, it really helps to be able to do that and get some early feedback. And then how do prototypes help BlueStreak estimate scope of work and schedule and budget? Well, first of all, I'll tell you, I call our pricing is component based. So when we price a project, the way that we do it is we look at the number of screens that we have to develop, which is based upon either hours or pages, depending upon, we usually get a rough idea of this course is going to be an hour, or we might have a document that we're converting to e-learning and that document is 20 pages. So when we estimate that, we basically say, okay, that's going to turn into 50 pages of content with 15 interactions and 40 quiz questions. And then our pricing is all based upon that, about how many deliverables, how many of each type of thing that we're developing. Well, when we prototype, we know what kind of interactions they take, they're going to have, how long each one of those is going to take, whether, we've had some that don't even want quiz questions at the end of it. They just want the entire course to be interactions. They don't want standard screens, that are just a basic teaching screen. So when we estimate the scope of work, what it can help is, saying, okay, you don't want 50 standard screens and 15 interactions. What you want is you want 30 interactions. Okay, well, let's compare that price to what we quoted you earlier. Schedule-wise, it's the same thing. I know that if I'm developing a certain type of interaction, that interaction, so for example, let's just say I'm using Articulate Engage and I'm developing a tabs interaction. Well, I know that my ratio for authoring, by the way, not writing, but authoring, is 0.75 hours for each one of those tabs interactions. So I know if I know how many of those I'm doing, I know how to estimate my scope of work and my schedule. So how many of those do I do in a day, and the budget, all of that comes out of the number of components and the types of components that are going to be in the course. Okay, so I have a cool question for you guys. So when do you think that prototyping should be done? And you can type the letter that corresponds to your answer. Okay, could be all of the above. Do I have any other answers? B, all right. D, uh-huh. And D, all right. So I got a couple of D's. I got B's and D's. All right. So when do we usually do a prototype? I'll tell you when we usually do it. So if you look at my project schedules for my projects, most of them have them at the first phase of the storyboarding process, because we will do the course design and the client will sign off on it, and then we will start writing a few of the storyboards, and we have to storyboard to develop out the prototype. You have to storyboard at least the prototype. So it usually is kind of between B and C. We've got a course design, we started writing, then we write kind of a storyboard just for the prototype, and then we develop the templates, which are both, depending upon the authoring tool, it could be a PowerPoint template, could be an authoring template, could be both. And then we start putting some content in those templates and get client reaction. Do you like this? Is this what you like? Now, the interesting thing about the all of the above answer is that in some ways it's true. I mean, although I really think that after D, you're kind of lost. I mean, with prototyping, I mean, a D is basically where you've developed the whole thing out. So once you've finished D, you're not really prototyping anymore. But I can see where, it is an evaluation process. Doing your prototyping, you're doing formative evaluation. But within an e-learning process, generally speaking, I would do it between B and C, and definitely before D. I've even done I've done when I am doing focus groups, I might do a prototype for focus groups within the needs assessment. So in A, I might create a prototype and then run it by some of the target audience members and ask them whether they would like that. When I typically do that is when the client is telling me that the target audience wants something different than I think they might want. So I might actually prototype what the client says and then show it to the audience members, and then they say it, and I don't have to say it. I don't have to say that, boy, that's not really, I don't know if that's really suitable for that audience. So anyway, generally any time before D is the answer. All right, there are some crucial times to prototype. And by the way, we do projects where we don't prototype. I would say it's probably it's more than half the time we do prototype, but not everything gets prototyped. So one of the times that it's really critical to prototype is if a client is new to e-learning. This is their very first e-learning project ever. And a lot of times what happens is that they don't have their terminology right, and they're using terms differently than what we might use them. And even when you're in the industry, that happens. But people who are outside the industry, they might describe something and use an e-learning word. I'm trying to think of an example. But they'll use an e-learning word, like they'll say, I want to develop the course in the LMS. Well, okay, what does that mean? Does that mean that your LMS has tools that allow for course development, and we have to stick with what's in there, or but they don't even know what a course authoring tool is. So and they don't know what the possibilities are. So it's really important when they're new to e-learning to at least give them a taste of what their course is going to look like before it gets fully developed. We also find that clients have very vague standards. Some clients have very strict standards, by the way. We work with like AC Nielsen, and they have very strict standards for what their courses have to look like, and their look and feel, and all of that. And but you get some clients who have, they barely have branding. As far as like what is their colors, what are their logos, what is their use of their logos, what makes their if you look at their documentation and their website and all of that, they're kind of all over the map. So you don't really know, are you just, do they like everything? Is there a style that goes with this client? So it's really crucial to produce some prototyping if you don't really have clear-cut standards for what their look and feel is, for what their branding is. Another reason, as I've mentioned before, is when you have unknown technical requirements, where you have maybe a learning management system that you've never worked with before, maybe you're working with a new course authoring tool, maybe you're targeting a very specific device, like not, maybe sometimes you're targeting iPads, actually, and that was one time when we did some prototyping early, was when we had a client who was entirely iPad based, and we had to make sure that everything we did worked well on an iPad, and so we were prototyping to make sure that that every type of interaction that we were going to put in that course would work well on an iPad. And by the way, they aren't always the case. We had to choose our authoring tool based upon what actually really worked on an iPad versus what would happened in theory. So, so I'd say that actually is one of the most critical times that we do. New tools, new versions. Another thing is right now we're going through a project with it's funded by FEMA, and it's on community disaster planning, and it has to be ADA Section 508 requirement or compliant. I don't know if you all know what that means. American Disabilities Act, and basically it's a whole bunch of standards for how people who either are visually impaired, can't hear, or audio, or basically deaf, don't have use of their hands, all different ways that people use computers. And basically what you have to do is you have to accommodate all of them. And there's all sorts of assistive devices that are used to help somebody get through an e-learning course. So in this case, we did a prototype of every type of interaction that's going to be in the course, and then we're sending that over to the 508 lab, and the 508 lab is having people with all these different disabilities test the prototype, to make sure that they can get through it with all the assistive devices. And then once we've gotten that feedback and fixed any issues that we found, we'll develop out the whole course, and based upon what our findings were. And what's really interesting about the 508 is I've had to be 508 compliant multiple times in my career, and every time I have to be 508 compliant, it is different. There's a whole set of interpretations of these standards, and depending upon how the organization interprets these standards, you could be in really hot water for the way that you develop it. Like if I develop it the way it worked for one organization and I give it to a different organization, it might flunk their test. So that it's really crucial there too if you have that 508 requirement. And then another time is if you have minimal or no needs assessment. So if you don't really know, a lot of times you have a client, we have clients that won't pay for needs assessment, and they just want to get straight into course development, and we don't really know what their audience likes and wants. So if we do some prototyping, maybe we can run it by a few of their target audience members or stakeholders and see what they like, what they don't like, and get some things ironed out before we get the whole course developed. So I see a question over on the side. How did the adoption of prototyping change the ID processes that BlueStreak Learning used to create early e-learning? I would say it involves our course authors earlier. In our shop, we're not we're not a one-person shop. We have instructional designers, we have course authors, we have graphic designers, we have voiceover talent, we have, we're a professional shop that uses, I believe that great e-learning, the best e-learning is a team sport. So how did the adoption of prototyping change that? It basically, what it did was it got our production team involved earlier in the process. Because when we were using more of a straight ID process where we'd analyze and then we'd design and then we'd storyboard and then we'd throw it over to all the production team, um, we just had a lot more fixes later on in the process, a lot more changes than we did. So basically what it does is it gets that production team involved earlier. We have a prototype storyboard. That storyboard goes to the production team. The production team says, oh, I can't do it the way you wrote it on that storyboard. Can we write it this way instead? And then all of the others storyboards have to be written that way as well. So I hope that answers your question. I don't know if it really changed it per se. I would say that in some cases we will insert that prototyping step at the beginning of the storyboarding phase, to get some things ironed out earlier on. All right, so next question for you guys. If you were to prototype an e-learning course, what would you include in the prototype? I've probably somewhat already answered this for you, but go ahead and what would you include in the prototype? Layout, interactions, programming, color schemes, menu style, yes, absolutely. Critical course and components, look and feel, layout, absolutely. What you want is you want your templates, you want your buttons, you want your general layout of how your your GUI, your graphic user interface, how the buttons are going to work, what they're going to look like, where they're going to go, how your interactions work, color schemes, yep, absolutely, menu style. Job aids, actually, interestingly, we don't usually include the job aids in the prototype. I mean, we might link out to something that is an attachment, but it will be more like a dummy document that would say, job aid goes here, because those aren't fully developed at that point. But representative, but you're totally right on the representative. You want one of every type of component that's going to be in the course. So if your course is using a tabs interaction, a hotspot interaction, multiple choice questions, if you're using characters, that's another thing. I'm going to show you some examples, and if you're using characters, you'll want to make sure that you include those as well. But yes, absolutely, look, feel, interactions, layout, and you need one that's representative of every type of interaction that you plan to use in the course. A menu, a standard screen, each type of interaction, each type of question, and to make sure that they like how all of those look. So here's my, when I prototype, and by the way, there's different levels of prototypes. So one thing I want to talk about is your storyboards can actually be your prototype. That was one thing I was going to open up and show you guys. So anyway, what you want to prototype is you want to prototype your authoring tool. You want to make sure that your authoring tools are doing what you need them to do, and that when you author a course, it is playable on the target devices. So you also want to make sure that you do your template and branding, your color schemes, as you said, and then you want to do at least one of each type of screen, your teaching screens. So there may be more than one type of layout, by the way. You may just have some with just bullets. You may have some with tables. But you want to create several different types with different layouts that you might use. Your quiz questions, how your exams are going to work, and you definitely want to include your images and characters if you're going to be using characters. Now, if you hold on for a second, I'm going to pull something up that I had forgotten to open up, and I'm going to try to screen share with you. But your PowerPoints can actually be your storyboards. One of the things that when we're working on a rapid authoring project where we're using a PowerPoint conversion tool, we will storyboard the course in PowerPoint. And basically the way that we do it is if you play the PowerPoint and you read the script while you're playing the PowerPoint, you can get a pretty good idea of what that course, how that course is going to look and feel. And let me see if I can pull one out and show you that. Okay, so let me see if I can screen share here for a second. Okay, so do you all see on the screen you have something called a module overview, lead driver program. Hopefully you're seeing that. These are our storyboards for a PowerPoint conversion project where we have developed the course. We develop the course in PowerPoint, and we basically use Articulate Studio to convert it. But what you see below is you see the script. Now what we do is we give the client the PowerPoint, and we have them print these notes pages so that they can read the script while they're watching the slides. Now if you go into slideshow view and you play the course from the beginning, they can watch the slides, and actually the bullets should be animating in on this, but they can watch the slides and read the script while they're looking at the slides and see what will be on the screen and what will be read. Now that's a very, very simple course. Actually, this is one that we did. I show this one as we did 35 lessons in 35 days. So we very, very quickly took a manual and turned it into some very quick e-learning. Okay, and I'm hearing some typing, so I don't know whose mic. Oh, I think it's Joanne's. There we go. All right, questions, comments about what to prototype? All right, I'm going to just give you a couple of scenarios, some real projects. You know, I don't really know. You mentioned BlueStreak Learning prototypes about half of the time. How does that compare to the field's use of prototyping in general? I really don't know, quite honestly. I don't know what other people do. I know the times when we don't prototype, it's usually because we've been given previous courses. So those are the prototypes. There are courses, and it's a series, it's a curriculum. It might be that this client has already developed their look and feel for how they're e-learning, and we're just following a model already. Usually when we prototype, it's when there is no model. This is the first, and we've got a lot of things to figure out. I don't know, as far as the rest of the marketplace, how often they prototype and not. I really don't. I know one of the big movements right now is this whole Agile movement, which is kind of an iterative development process. And frankly, I'm not big on it. I believe in the prototyping up front, and I think that our process, we have a lot of reviews in our process. Is that iterative? I don't know. Is it really different than what Agile is? I don't know. It doesn't seem to be that different, frankly. But, you know, there's different, everybody kind of develops their own style and their own way of doing things over the years when you do instructional design. So I have no idea. I just do what works for our projects. Prototyping. So I'm going to give you a couple scenarios. So this screen that you see on the screen here is a course that we did for a bank client, and basically they wanted they wanted to use a game-based approach, and they were teaching new employees about the different parts of the organization and what those people in the organization did. And they were teaching some basic information about the organization. So they wanted to use a game-based approach, and the game that we came up with is kind of a discovery learning approach, where we'd have a guide who asks questions, and then you have to talk to the different heads of departments in order to find the answer to the question. And anyway, this prototype here, this really was the prototype. And what we found out when we did this, by the way, these characters, this was when Storyline was a new product, and Articulate Storyline. And we pulled these characters straight out of Storyline in order to create this prototype. And the client hated them. They hated the characters. They did not like these cartoony looking characters. And we ended up throwing we ended up finding a whole bunch of different character packs and showing the client different styles of characters. And it's funny what they ended up liking, and I don't have an example, but they ended up liking these very lean looking. They didn't very lean looking characters. They were still cartoony, but they were very lean looking as opposed to with filled out faces. I don't know how to explain it other than that. But it was one of those things we would have never anticipated that. Never in a million years. We pulled the characters out of storyline, thought they looked good. I still to this day think they look good. I think they look better than what the ones that and I think they look better than yeah, I know. I think they look better than the ones that the client ended up choosing. But you know what? It's the client's choice. They're in charge, and you know, they're the ones that are. So it's really important to run some of those characters by them. If you're going to be using scenario-based learning with characters. So Bethany, yeah, absolutely. I mean, your compliance department loves these. We use these characters all the time too, but this particular client hated them. So we had to go out and buy different character packs. And by the way, that upped the budget. For those of you that are worried about the budget, that's what happens is when you have to go out and buy something that's not in your tool, but they were fine with that. We said, this is what it's going to cost to buy these other characters, and they said fine. So this is another prototype. This is one that it's going to be released pretty soon. It's actually going to be beta tested pretty soon. This is for the International Franchise Association, and it's a performance support tool for people who are looking at buying a franchise. And again, we have a character here, and we had to run a bunch of characters by the client to figure out which one they wanted. And we ended up buying this character pack. This particular character is called Adam. But what our prototype is basically we had to prototype this franchise toolkit. We had to figure out where we were going to put the documents. This course basically walks you through the decision process of buying a franchise, but there's all sorts of worksheets and documents that are in there. So this hard hat ended up being the place where we put the documents. But we had multiple iterations of this interface. We ended up with this toolbox on the bottom and the pegboard on the top. And on the pegboard, we had to figure out which tool was going to represent which thing. So we've got a glossary, and that one's represented by a wrench, and we've got the intro to the course, but anyway, which tool was going to represent which thing on the pegboard. Where the audio control is going to be, how do you jump between the sections on the course. So this at the top, there's a little pull down menu, and that's how you jump between the sections of the topics. Then we had to find Adam's voice. That's another thing, is what does Adam sound like? I think we had actually had a different voice in there, and we had to swap out his voice because he wanted somebody who sounded younger than the guy that we had originally put in there. So those were some of the things that came out of that prototyping effort. And now this one's just about done, and they're very happy with it. So any questions about this prototype or this project or the one before it? I have one more to show you. Okay, I'll show you one more. This one was kind of interesting. This is one where it was a technical issue, where we had a technical issue. This was done for the Propane Education and Research Council. They gave us videos, and they wanted us to turn the videos into online courses. And one of the concerns that we had was that, and this is probably 8 years ago at that time, we still actually have this concern, though. The concern is that this audience tends to be a very rural audience. The people who use propane are in more of a rural setting. And when you're in a rural setting, you don't necessarily have high-speed cable. And we were concerned that the people who would be taking this course would not have the bandwidth to support the video in the course. So we had to do some experimenting with this, and we basically one of the reasons the video window's kind of small, because we had to make it smaller in order to make sure that it was playable. I mean, some of these people had dial-up, we had to make sure it was playable at least on a low-speed DSL connection. So we had to make the video window small. We had to use a whole bunch of different compression ratios, compression techniques to get the video so that it was playable on low-speed DSL. And then we actually had to test it with some of the target audience members to make sure that they could view it. The other thing is they aren't very computer savvy. Think about your typical propane installer. Not very computer savvy. Much easier for them to put the DVD in the DVD player than it is for them to get on a computer and play an e-learning course and run this through a learning management system. So we had to make it pretty simple for them. We also were copying an interface from a previous course that they had done, so they wanted to make sure that they maintained kind of the same look and feel and buttons. So we kept those things, but then we had to create this video window as well. So it ends up, well, that's that it ends up actually this course never actually was deployed. So let me see, I've got a couple of questions here. So this is good. So technical prototypes iterate from early proof of concept, early PowerPoint look and feel, to later iterations that are running in the client's actual technical infrastructure. Not necessarily. We usually just do one prototype. I mean, well, there's proof of concept might be your storyboard, where we storyboard the prototype. So yeah, I mean, it iterates from there. You've got a storyboard that we do in PowerPoint, or you know, where we show them that and they look at that and go, yeah, I'll produce that, and then we you know, produce the prototype. And when we produce, after we produce the prototype, we actually have to run it on the client's technical architecture. So it's very important to do that, especially in situations where you don't necessarily have high-speed internet. Even in corporate situations, you have firewalls and all sorts of stuff. I mean, some of them you can't play Flash, and you know, you really have to be careful about what technologies you use and whether they're playable in the environment and on the devices that they're ultimately going to be played on. And then I have a question from Jessica. How did the prototypes compare to the final product? Do they look much different than the prototypes? It depends on the client. Very good. If I go back to this one, the final course looks really different. And I won't put you through trying to find what the actual course looks like on my system, but it looks very, I mean, the background is still the same, but the characters are very different. They didn't like the bubbles. They didn't like the circular. So we had to create much more angular, squarer. I think we ended up putting these people in a hallway where they were popping out of offices instead of in these bubbles. So I mean, it looked very, very different in the end. They really did not like the prototype and made drastic changes after that, and in that case, very good. This one looks very much like this. So this one really didn't change much, and this one didn't change much. But you know, most of them don't change drastically, but some of them do. Technology, how often do you use tools like Flash and Engage when developing your courses? Well, we very rarely use Flash these days. We used to use it more, but we generally use standard authoring tools that you can buy off the shelf. So our philosophy as a company is that we don't want to tie you down. Well, first of all, we're big on the e-learning standards. So if we want to develop our courses so that they're compliant with at least one of the e-learning standards, AICC, SCORM, or the Experience API. And in order to do that, the easiest way to do that is typically to use one of the tools out there that's already compliant with those standards, as it has been tested in those standards. So we use Articulate, we use Storyline, we use Captivate, we use iSpring, we use a product called Udoo 2, which is a free LCMS. But you know, we'll use just about anything that's standards compliant. We very rarely do any kind of custom coding. We can if we need to, and we have, but we usually prefer to avoid it. One of our goals is, believe it or not, we want, if the client wants to edit their own course, they should be able to buy the tool and edit themselves. We have taught our clients to do their own course editing after they've bought the tools. For some of our nonprofit clients, that works very well. And you know, if they want to fire us and hire somebody else, then all that person needs is the tool. But whenever you do something really custom, like Flash or coding, then you're in a situation where you're kind of stuck with the person who did it, or you're in a really difficult revision situation where, so I always encourage people to stick with things that are on the market and probably going to be on the market for a long time as far as tool sets are concerned. Other questions? I'm just going to move on. My last slide is just a general questions screen if you guys have any. What are BlueStreak Learning's expectations for entry-level IDs? Do you hire them? What are the typical job duties? What does a career path look like? Good question. So I'll tell you, we don't hire entry-level IDs. I would love to, frankly. I have just found that it's too much work for me to coach them, and which is a sad state. I have. Hopefully your ideas that are coming out of your program are not the same way, but when I hire an instructional designer, what I expect them to be able to do is I expect them to be able to walk into a new content area, review the content, start creating structure around that content, start creating questions, analyze it, ask the right questions. Actually, let me go back. I don't really hire entry-level IDs. Everybody I hire has at least 10 years of experience and they know what to do, and I can throw a project at them and they know how to do it. If I were to hire an entry-level ID, I might have them in a helping role to somebody who is more of a senior ID. I might put them on storyboarding where they'd be given a design document. The design document would have a set of objectives on it, and it would also have their content sources where they were supposed to get the content to meet each one of the objectives. It would have the instructional strategy for how we were going to teach that content, as well as the evaluation strategy for how we were going to measure whether those objectives were met. Based upon that, I would expect them to be able to write a comprehensive storyboard, and they would also have to know the tool and what the tool was capable of, and how the output would work. So we would know we're working in Articulate, and this is what the Articulate interface looks like. So they're going to press the forward arrow to move to the next screen. Okay, well, that's got to be written into the instructions. So one of the things I will tell you, one of the things that I find that's lacking in a lot of instructional designers, just in general, not just entry level ones, is what I call directionals. It means that you've got to know how that course is going to work and write for that, and write your directions for how to use that course. Even though the course isn't developed yet, those directions have to be spot on, and if you don't know what they are, you have to go to your course author and make sure that you understand how that course is and that interaction is going to work, and so that you write proper directions for, because I find that they might be able to write content, but they don't really know how this whole course is going to work, and it shows, and it really creates confusion for the learner if you don't really know how that course is going to work when you're writing the storyboard. So, so typical job duties would be maybe writing test questions, good solid test questions with good item construction, maybe writing a storyboard, either in PowerPoint or in Word. So hopefully that helps. Has BlueStreak Learning signed the eLearning Guild's eLearning Manifesto? Why or why not? Yes, we have. We have. So the why have we? Because we're big believers in performance-based coursing. That when I was at IBM, we used to call it slide whipping people to death. Is when you just give them one slide after another of text, and that's, I don't know. I don't really consider that to be e-learning. I consider that to be putting a book online. E-learning is where you have objectives, where you have measurement of those objectives, and hopefully those objectives are performance objectives and not just recall objectives. So yeah, absolutely, we're a supporter of the manifesto. I haven't heard much about it lately. Slide whipping, yeah. That's what we used to call it at IBM. You were, as one of the managers, you're slide whipping these people to death. Would you stop giving them so many slides? Just tell them what they need to know. Any other questions or comments? How receptive are your clients to the phrase, great e-learning is a team sport? It's a new concept for a lot of them. A lot of them think that they're going to hire one instructional designer, and that instructional designer is going to create a great course for them, and that it is, and we have to show them a lot of times that there are actually, and I do a separate speech on this, but what does it take to create great e-learning? There's actually 5 different skill sets, and each one of the skill sets is a degree program. When I start to show them what goes into creating a great course, they're typically, as long as it doesn't cost them more, they're typically agreeable to bringing in a team rather than bringing in a single person to do a job. I compete against a lot of companies who are more staffing companies, and they'll bring in one instructional designer to do an entire project. And honestly, a lot of times I don't think it's really fair to that person, because expecting them, to walk in and be able to, you really, actually, it takes 10 years to get to the point where you can do everything. Boy, Steve, that's a different speech, but let me, off the top of my head, one of them is instructional design or writing. um, I should tell that to your boss. All right. Well, we're getting into. I tell it to a lot of bosses, actually, because I do think that it really. I've always done this as a team sport, and I get frustrated when I try to do it myself, because I'm really not a great graphic designer. And when I have a great graphic designer, things go so much better. Now, I'm a pretty good writer and I'm a pretty good programmer, which, by the way, the skill sets, one of them is writing. One of them is the technical part of things, like the authoring and the SCORM. Another one is the graphic design. So you've got writing, you've got visuals, um, so writing, there's visuals, there's the technical part of things, then there's the media part of things, and the media part of things are the audio and video types of, and again, each one of these things, there's graphic design degrees, there's you can get a degree in media production, you can get a degree in instructional design, you could get, so each one of those things, you could have a whole entire degree on it. Yet we have people who, I digress, this is one of my speeches and I get on my soapbox about it, but they expect one person to be able to do that. And when you break it down, what it really takes to do great e-learning, it really is, each one of those skill sets is a degree. And there's, yes, can I do a visual? Can I slap this picture on a screen? Absolutely. Can I make it look the same way my graphic designer, like, for example, let me go back. This screen was done by a graphic designer. So I would never be able to do those little bubbles with those people's heads in them and animate the mouths the way that they are. And I would never think of putting that background on that. That's what the graphic designer does. So, all right, anyway, hopefully that answered your question. How does BlueStreak ensure clients provide the resources you need to create e-learning for them? SMEs, data, content, graphic. We contract with them. Basically, when I create a contract, again, I have component-based pricing, but it's also a task list. And the task list basically shows what task we're going to do and what task they're going to do. And it basically sets hours next to each one of those tasks. So you're going to provide us with content. You're going to provide us with access to your SMEs. We're going to need 6 hours of your SMEs time, 1 hour for each one of these modules to be able to ask our questions. We're going to read through your documentation. We're going to get together with your SME. We're going to have questions for your SME. We're going to need an hour for each one of the modules to be able to get all of our questions answered. Same thing, you're going to have to review your design document. It's going to take you 2 hours to review your design document. We're going to have a kickoff call. You're going to have to be there for an hour. You're going to have to review your storyboards. It's probably going to take you 4 hours to do a detailed review of each one of these storyboards, or whatever it is. It's in the contract. How did I learn to contract? I don't know. How did I learn to contract? Like I said, I've been doing this 28 years. I guess I learned how to create a project plan and project management classes, and then basically the contract just flowed out of the project management plan. How does it see resources you need? So basically, the graphics and everything, basically that's part of the contract too. It's part of the assumptions in the contract where we say you're going to provide us with your branding and your that's all spelled out what they're going to have to provide us with. It's also in the kickoff call. How do we ensure we have them in a timely fashion? Oh gosh, welcome to my life. I mean, I have projects that I just actually canceled. Last week I had to cancel 2 projects because we've had storyboards out there for months and they never got reviewed. So basically we sent them a project cancellation letter that said, I'm sorry, the project's now canceled. If and when you're ready to restart it, call me. You know, how do you ensure? You can't. We tell them when we need it. We have a schedule. We send them the storyboard. We say we need your response by blah 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 date. We actually are starting to build a project restart fee into our contracts, which is kind of a new idea that we have, where we are going to charge them if it's been more than 60 days since we gave them a deliverable to review and they haven't gotten back to us. So hopefully that answers your question. We're coming up on the top of the hour. Any last final questions, comments?
Jennifer, it's Steve.
Yes.
I know that you are a certified performance technologist. Uh,
Yes.
why do you have that certificate?
I got that certificate because, well, I'll be honest, I was leaving IBM and they said that they'd pay for a certification as part of my package. They were, downsizing. And at that time, I could get grandfathered into the CPT certification with an abbreviated process. So IBM paid for it. I figured, why not get the certification? I already had the background and knowledge and projects and everything to be able to do it. So I did. I think of the certifications that are out there, it's the most relevant for me besides my master's degree itself. I find that like the CPLP there's not enough it's not e-learning oriented enough. It's more general, and I'm not really a generalist. But I am, at my orientation is as a performance technologist. I am ultimately down deep, I believe that what I'm doing is to improve the way somebody's able to do their job at the end of the day. So it really kind of went along with what my values are.
And at this point, we've come to the end of our time. So I'd like to ask everyone to thank Jennifer in the thank you box. Jennifer, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your expertise with us.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
And I look forward to seeing you at ISPI.
Okay, my next one is Learning Solutions at the eLearning Guild's Learning Solutions Conference.
And when is that?
March, it's around March 25th, so it's about a month from now in
Most cool.
Orlando. And I'm speaking at the the Learning Ecosystems Conference on LMS selection.
Oh, very cool.
Yes, and you're welcome, Rotondria. I think I got that right. You're welcome. Thanks everybody for coming.
Thank you all for coming. And this concludes our webinar.